From Success to Significance. The marble floors of the Manhattan private equity office gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights as 30-year-old Sahil Bloom sat in his corner office, staring at the financial statements that should have represented the culmination of everything he'd worked toward since his days as a Stanford baseball player. The numbers were extraordinary. His personal income had reached 7 figures. His investment portfolio was diversified and growing. His professional reputation was sterling, and his future prospects seemed unlimited. But as Sahil looked out his floor-to-ceiling windows at the New York City skyline, all he could feel was a suffocating emptiness that made him question everything he'd believed about success, achievement, and what it meant to live a meaningful life. "Is this it?" he whispered to himself, the words hanging in the air like an indictment of everything he'd accomplished. "Is this what I worked so hard for?" The question terrified him because he couldn't answer it honestly without confronting the possibility that he'd spent the past decade chasing goals that had nothing to do with actual fulfillment, happiness, or purpose. He had achieved every marker of success that society, his family, and his own ambition had defined as important. The prestigious education, the high-paying career, the expensive apartment, the luxury car, the professional recognition, the financial security that most people could only dream about. And he was absolutely miserable. The journey to that moment of devastating self-awareness had begun with promise and passion that made his current despair even more heartbreaking. Growing up in a family that valued education and achievement, Sahil had been the kind of child who excelled at everything he touched, while maintaining the humility and work ethic that made success seem natural rather than forced. At Stanford University, Sahil had been living his dream as a member of the Cardinal baseball team, pursuing athletics at the highest collegiate level, while earning a degree from one of America's most prestigious institutions. Baseball wasn't just his sport. It was his identity, his passion, his path to a professional career that seemed destined for greatness. The practices were grueling, the competition was fierce, and the pressure was immense, but Sahil thrived in an environment that demanded excellence both physically and mentally. He loved the strategy of baseball, the split-second decisions that separated success from failure, the team dynamics that required individual brilliance within collective effort. More importantly, baseball gave Sahil something that he wouldn't fully appreciate until it was taken away, a sense of purpose that transcended personal achievement. When he was on the field, he wasn't just playing a game. He was part of something larger than himself, contributing to team success while pursuing individual excellence in a way that felt meaningful and authentic. The injury happened during what should have been a routine play in his junior year, a slide into second base, a collision with the opposing player, and suddenly Sahil was lying on the infield dirt with pain shooting through his shoulder that would eventually end not just his season, but his baseball career entirely. The diagnosis was devastating: torn rotator cuff, damaged labrum, nerve impingement that made throwing at a competitive level impossible. Surgery might restore basic function, but the explosive, precise movement required for professional baseball was permanently compromised. "I'm sorry, Sahil," the team doctor said after reviewing the MRI results. "Your baseball career is over." Those 6 words destroyed not just Sahil's athletic dreams, but his entire sense of identity and direction. For 21 years, baseball had been the organizing principle of his life, his daily routines, his long-term goals, his understanding of who he was and what he was capable of achieving. Suddenly, all of that was gone, replaced by uncertainty that felt impossibly vast and terrifying. The months following his injury were among the darkest of Sahil's young life. While his teammates continued their season and prepared for professional opportunities, he sat in physical therapy sessions that restored mobility, but couldn't heal the psychological wound of having his deepest dreams shattered by forces beyond his control. "What am I going to do now?" became the question that haunted his every waking moment. Without baseball, who was Sahil Bloom? What did he want from life when his primary source of purpose and identity had been stripped away? The answer, when it came, felt like settling for something less than his true calling. Finance offered intellectual challenges, financial rewards, and career prestige that could provide structure and goals to replace what baseball had represented. It wasn't his passion, but it was respectable, lucrative, and achievable, qualities that seemed more important than excitement or fulfillment when you're trying to rebuild your entire life trajectory. Sahil threw himself into finance with the same intensity he'd brought to baseball, studying financial markets, networking with successful professionals, and pursuing internships that would position him for a lucrative career in investment banking and private equity. The transition wasn't easy, but it was systematic and purposeful in ways that helped him regain confidence in his ability to succeed in whatever field he chose to pursue. The early years of his finance career were marked by the kind of grinding determination that separates successful professionals from those who settle for mediocrity. Sahil worked 100-hour weeks, studied market trends with obsessive attention to detail, and built relationships with senior professionals who could accelerate his career advancement. His analytical skills, which had served him well in understanding baseball strategy, translated perfectly to financial analysis. His competitive drive, which had pushed him to excel in athletics, motivated him to outperform colleagues and exceed client expectations. Most importantly, his experience with high-pressure situations gave him composure and decision-making abilities that impressed supervisors and clients alike. Within 5 years, Sahil had established himself as one of the rising stars in New York's competitive private equity industry. His investment recommendations generated exceptional returns for clients. His deal-making skills attracted high-profile transactions. His professional reputation opened doors to opportunities that most people his age could never access. By his 30th birthday, Sahil had achieved what anyone would consider extraordinary financial success. His annual income exceeded most people's lifetime earnings. His investment portfolio provided security that would allow him to maintain his lifestyle indefinitely. His professional achievements had earned recognition from industry publications and peer organizations. He had everything he thought he wanted, and he was profoundly unhappy in ways that he couldn't explain to anyone, including himself. The realization hit him during a particularly successful week when he'd closed a major deal, received a substantial bonus, and been profiled in a financial industry magazine as one of the rising stars to watch. He should have been celebrating, but instead he found himself sitting in his expensive apartment, surrounded by the symbols of his success, wondering why achievement felt so hollow. "I had the high-paying job, the title, the house, the car. It was all there," Sahil would later write, reflecting on that period of his life. "But beneath the surface, I was miserable. I began to think something was wrong with me. All I could think was, is this it? The depression that followed wasn't the dramatic, obvious kind that people recognize and address immediately. It was subtle, persistent, and professional, the kind of misery that successful people experience when they realize that their achievements haven't created the fulfillment they'd been promised. Sahil continued performing at work, maintaining his social obligations, and projecting the image of success that everyone expected from someone in his position. But privately, he was struggling with existential questions that challenged everything he'd believed about success, purpose, and what it meant to live a meaningful life. The breakthrough came through an unexpected source: his relationship with his elderly grandfather, who had been watching Sahil's professional success with pride, but also with concern that his grandson seemed to be losing something essential in his pursuit of conventional achievement. "Tell me, Sahil," his grandfather said during one of their regular Sunday dinners, "are you happy?" It was such a simple question, asked with such genuine concern, that it pierced through all the professional defenses and rationalizations that Sahil had constructed around his dissatisfaction. "I don't know, Grandpa," Sahil replied honestly. "I have everything I thought I wanted, but I feel empty inside. I feel like I'm living someone else's life instead of my own." His grandfather nodded with the wisdom of someone who had lived through decades of pursuing different definitions of success and had learned to distinguish between achievement and fulfillment. "Success without happiness is just elaborate failure," he said. "Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy peace. Status can buy respect, but it can't buy love. You have to decide what kind of wealthy you want to be." That conversation planted the seed of an idea that would eventually transform not just Sahil's life, but the lives of millions of people who are struggling with similar questions about success, purpose, and what it means to live a truly wealthy life. Instead of continuing to accept his misery as the price of professional success, Sahil began investigating what actually created lasting fulfillment for people who had achieved different types of success across various industries and life circumstances. He started reading voraciously: psychology research about happiness and well-being, philosophy about meaning and purpose, biographies of people who had found fulfillment in different ways. But more importantly, he began conducting informal interviews with people whose lives seemed to embody the kind of contentment and significance he was seeking. The research process led him to conversations with entrepreneurs who had built meaningful companies, artists who had found creative fulfillment, family members who had prioritized relationships over career advancement, and perhaps most importantly, elderly individuals who could offer perspective on what mattered most when viewed from the end of life rather than the middle of career building. "I started interviewing people in their 80s and 90s, Sahil would later explain, asking them what they wished they had known when they were my age, what they regretted, what they were proudest of, what advice they would give to someone trying to build a meaningful life." The patterns that emerged from these conversations were both surprising and illuminating. Very few of the elderly individuals mentioned money, career achievements, or professional recognition as sources of lasting satisfaction. Instead, they talked about relationships, health, personal growth, meaningful work, and the freedom to choose how they spent their time. "Not a single person told me they wished they had worked more hours or made more money," Sahil recalls. But dozens of them told me they wished they had prioritized their relationships, their health, their personal development, and their ability to contribute to something larger than themselves. From these conversations, Sahil began to identify 5 distinct categories of wealth that seemed to contribute to lasting fulfillment in ways that financial success alone never could. Time. Wealth, the freedom to choose how you spend your hours, days, and years, rather than having your time controlled by external obligations that don't align with your values and priorities. Social wealth, deep, meaningful relationships with family, friends, and community members who provide love, support, and connection that money can't purchase or replace. Mental wealth, psychological well-being, emotional resilience, intellectual growth, and the kind of inner peace that comes from understanding yourself and your place in the world. Physical wealth, health, energy, and vitality that allow you to enjoy life experiences and pursue your goals without being limited by preventable health problems or poor fitness. Financial wealth, money and assets that provide security and freedom, but viewed as a tool for enabling the other types of wealth rather than an end goal in itself. The framework wasn't just theoretical, it was deeply personal, arising from Sahil's recognition that his singular focus on financial wealth had come at the expense of every other dimension of richness that could have made his achievements meaningful. I realized I had prioritized one thing at the expense of everything else, he reflects. I was financially wealthy, but time poor, socially isolated, mentally stressed, physically unhealthy, and spiritually empty. I had optimized for only one type of wealth, while neglecting the 4 others that actually create lasting fulfillment. The decision to leave private equity and pursue a completely different path was terrifying for someone whose entire adult identity had been built around financial achievement and professional status. But Sahil had learned that the fear of change was less frightening than the certainty of continued emptiness. Instead of pursuing another traditional career, Sahil decided to share his insights about wealth redefinition through writing, speaking, and content creation that could reach people who were struggling with similar questions about success and fulfillment. The transition wasn't easy or immediately lucrative. Moving from a 7-figure private equity salary to the uncertain income of an independent content creator required substantial financial planning and psychological adjustment. But for the first time in years, Sahil felt energized by his work rather than drained by it. His writing began attracting attention from people who resonated with his message about redefining wealth and success. His newsletter, The Curiosity Chronicle, grew from a few hundred subscribers to hundreds of thousands as readers shared his insights with friends and colleagues who were asking similar questions about purpose and fulfillment. The content wasn't just philosophical, it was practical, offering specific strategies and frameworks that people could use to assess and improve their wealth across all 5 dimensions. Sahil developed assessment tools, habit-building systems, and goal-setting methodologies that helped readers identify where they were wealthy and where they needed to invest more intentionally. But perhaps most importantly, his message gave people permission to define success on their own terms, rather than accepting society's narrow focus on financial achievement as the primary measure of a life well lived. The breakthrough moment came when one of Sahil's newsletter essays about the 5 types of wealth went viral on social media, attracting millions of readers and thousands of responses from people who felt seen and understood in ways they had never experienced through traditional success literature. Your essay made me realize why I feel so empty, despite having everything I thought I wanted, wrote one reader. I'm successful on paper, but poor in every way that actually matters. I've been chasing financial goals for 20 years while neglecting my health, my relationships, and my personal growth, wrote another. Your framework helped me understand why I'm exhausted all the time, even though I'm supposedly winning. The responses poured in from people across different industries, age groups, and life circumstances, all struggling with the same disconnect between external achievement and internal fulfillment that Sahil had experienced during his private equity career. The demand for deeper exploration of these concepts led to speaking engagements where Sahil shared his framework with audiences ranging from college students to corporate executives to entrepreneurs seeking more meaningful approaches to success. The book proposal naturally followed. Publishers were intrigued by Sahil's unique combination of financial expertise, personal transformation story, and practical framework that addressed widespread dissatisfaction with conventional definitions of success. The 5 Types of Wealth, a transformative guide to design your dream life, was published in 2024 and immediately struck a chord with readers who had been waiting for someone to articulate what they had been feeling but couldn't express. The book spent multiple weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, not because of marketing campaigns or celebrity endorsements, but because it addressed fundamental questions about purpose and fulfillment that millions of people were asking, but few authors were answering with practical, actionable insights. High-profile endorsements came from business leaders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who recognized the value of Sahil's framework. Apple CEO Tim Cook called it a powerful call to action, to think deeply about what lights you up, and a guide for how to build a life of meaning and purpose. But the most meaningful validation came from readers who shared how the 5 Types of Wealth framework had helped them make better decisions about their careers, relationships, health, and life priorities. I left a job that was making me miserable but looked impressive on paper, wrote one reader. Using your framework, I realized I was trading time wealth and mental wealth for financial wealth, and the exchange rate was terrible. I started prioritizing my relationships and my health instead of just my career advancement, shared another. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm building something sustainable instead of just achieving arbitrary goals. The media attention that followed the book's success brought opportunities to share the 5 Types of Wealth framework with even larger audiences through television interviews, podcast appearances, and keynote speeches at major conferences. But Sahil was careful to ensure that his message remained focused on practical application rather than just theoretical discussion. Each presentation included specific tools, assessments, and strategies that audiences could implement immediately to begin building wealth across all 5 dimensions. The speaking engagements also revealed how universally applicable the 5 Types of Wealth framework was across different cultures, industries, and life stages. Whether addressing college students planning their careers or senior executives considering retirement, the same fundamental questions about purpose and fulfillment resonated with audiences who had never been given language to articulate their dissatisfaction with purely financial definitions of success. The international expansion of Sahil's message came through translation of his book into multiple languages and invitations to speak in countries where rapid economic development had created similar disconnects between financial achievement and personal fulfillment. The same patterns exist everywhere, Sahil observes. People achieve financial success and then wonder why they don't feel fulfilled. The five types of wealth framework provides a roadmap for building the other dimensions of richness that actually create lasting satisfaction. The consulting practice that emerged from his book Success allows Sahil to work directly with corporations, nonprofit organizations, and individual clients who want to implement five types of wealth principles in their organizational cultures or personal lives. The work with companies has been particularly impactful as leaders recognize that employees who are wealthy across all five dimensions are more engaged, creative, and productive than those who are only motivated by financial compensation. We've seen dramatic improvements in employee satisfaction, retention, and performance when organizations start thinking about total wealth rather than just salary and benefits, Sahil explains. People want to work for companies that help them build meaningful lives, not just paychecks. The individual coaching work allows Sahil to help people navigate major life transitions using the five types of wealth framework as a decision-making tool. Whether someone is considering a career change, relationship decisions, or lifestyle adjustments, the framework provides clarity about trade-offs and priorities that purely financial analysis can't capture. Today, 7 years after that moment of existential crisis in his private equity office, Sahil has created a new definition of wealth that has influenced millions of people worldwide. His newsletter reaches hundreds of thousands of readers. His book continues selling internationally. His speaking engagements attract audiences seeking more meaningful approaches to success. But when Sahil reflects on his transformation from miserable millionaire to fulfilled entrepreneur, he focuses on personal metrics that would have seemed impossible to measure during his finance career. I have time wealth. I control how I spend my days rather than having my schedule dictated by external obligations that don't align with my values, he explains. I have social wealth, deep relationships with family and friends who knew me before I was successful and will love me regardless of my achievements. I have mental wealth, psychological peace that comes from doing work that feels meaningful rather than just profitable. I have physical wealth, energy, and health that allow me to enjoy experiences and pursue goals without being limited by preventable problems. And yes, I have financial wealth, but now it serves as a tool for enabling the other types of wealth rather than being the primary goal that everything else gets sacrificed for. The impact of Sahil's message extends far beyond individual transformation. The five types of wealth framework has influenced how companies think about employee benefits, how educational institutions approach success metrics, how families discuss priorities and values, and how communities measure progress and prosperity. Business schools have begun incorporating five types of wealth concepts into their curricula, recognizing that future leaders need frameworks for sustainable success that go beyond purely financial optimization. Mental health professionals have adopted elements of the framework to help clients identify sources of fulfillment that don't depend on external achievement or validation from others. Policymakers have referenced five types of wealth principles when discussing measures of societal progress that account for well-being, community connection, and life satisfaction rather than just economic indicators. But perhaps the most significant impact has been on individual people who have used the framework to make better decisions about their careers, relationships, health, and life priorities. I receive messages every day from people who tell me that the 5 types of wealth framework help them leave unfulfilling jobs, prioritize their families, improve their health, or pursue meaningful work. Sahil says, "That's more valuable to me than any financial achievement from my private equity career." The philanthropic initiatives that have emerged from Sahil's platform focus on democratizing access to the resources and education that help people build wealth across all 5 dimensions, regardless of their economic circumstances. Scholarship programs provide educational opportunities for students who want to pursue meaningful work rather than just high-paying careers. Mental health initiatives support research and treatment options that address the spiritual and psychological dimensions of well-being. Community programs help people build social wealth through connection and service opportunities. True wealth should be accessible to everyone, not just people who can afford expensive coaching or exclusive programs, Sahil emphasizes. The 5 types of wealth framework works regardless of your starting point or financial resources. The ongoing research and development of new tools and methodologies keeps Sahil's message current and applicable to changing social and economic conditions. As technology, globalization, and cultural shifts create new challenges for people seeking meaningful success, the 5 types of wealth framework continues evolving to address contemporary problems while maintaining its core principles. The measurement tools have become more sophisticated, allowing people to track their progress across all 5 wealth dimensions, using quantitative and qualitative assessments that provide clear guidance for improvement areas. The community aspect has grown into a global network of people who support each other's efforts to build wealth across all 5 dimensions, sharing resources, accountability, and encouragement that makes sustainable change more achievable. The educational programs now include online courses, workshops, and certification programs for coaches and consultants who want to help others implement 5 types of wealth principles in their personal and professional lives. But at its core, Sahil's message remains beautifully simple. Wealth is not just about money. Success is not just about achievement. And a meaningful life requires intentional development of multiple dimensions of richness that work together to create lasting fulfillment. From the Stanford baseball field to the private equity office to the global platform where he now teaches millions of people about authentic success, Sahil's journey demonstrates that the most meaningful transformations often begin with the courage to ask difficult questions about what we really want from life. The athlete who lost his baseball career found his true calling. The millionaire who felt empty discovered genuine wealth. The successful professional who asked, "Is this it?" found an answer that changed not just his life, but the lives of millions of people who were asking the same question. Today, when Sahil wakes up in the morning, he doesn't check stock prices or review financial statements. Instead, he considers how he wants to spend his time, wealth, who he wants to connect with for social wealth, what he wants to learn for mental wealth, how he wants to care for his physical wealth, and yes, how his financial wealth can serve as a tool for enabling everything else that makes life meaningful. The question, "Is this it?" has been replaced by a different question. How can I build wealth in all the ways that actually matter? For millions of people around the world who have embraced the 5 types of wealth framework, That question has become the foundation for designing lives that are rich in every dimension that creates lasting fulfillment. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries begin with the courage to admit that everything you've achieved isn't enough, and the wisdom to redefine success in ways that honor the full spectrum of human needs and desires. From miserable millionaire to fulfilled teacher of authentic wealth, Sahil Bloom's story proves that it's never too late to ask better questions about what you really want from life, and never too late to build the kinds of wealth that create genuine, sustainable happiness.